am so excited about tonight's program. And many of you, I hope you bought Dr. Lawson's book, but if you didn't, it's only $20. He's here to autograph them for you after the meeting. And the wonderful thing about Dr. Lawson and his partner, Ben Powell, is that Mark Levin, who I listen to every night, his radio show and his Sunday night show, and he is the great one. And I was watching his Sunday night show and I thought, those professors are talking about socialism sucks. Oh my gosh, that is so true. But to put it in the context of drinking their way through the unfree world, I was like, this is a gift I can give my high school and college-age nephews. And maybe they'll just read it and we can have a discussion about it. Of course, when I met Dr. Lawson in person and I told him that story, he said, well, how did that go over? I'm still waiting on a book review from all four of my nephews. But anyway, these professors were on Mark Levin's show, and they made it so easy to understand the ills and the pitfalls and why this country is so great, because socialism is so horrible. But they did it in a humorous and engaging way. And so you're really in for a great treat tonight. And I have to say that if I I'm an SMU alumna. I went the journalism route, but no, I didn't do the reporting. I was wise and went into public relations and marketing. But I do want to just say that Dr. Lawson holds the full and wider chair in economic freedom and directs the O'Neill Center at the Cox School of Business at SMU. And he is the co-founder of the widely cited Economic Freedom of the World Index and has written more than 100 academic articles, book chapters, policy reports, and book reviews. And he has a personal endorsement from two of his former students, one of whom is Pia Laura, who had him as her graduate school professor, and then also Genevieve Collins, who's running for office, so Genevieve, wave. So, great endorsement from these two ladies who had Professor Lawson as their professor. So I am going to invite Dr. Lawson to come up and speak, and I do also want to tell you that I've heard him, this will be my third time, and it's great every time you hear him. I've heard him speak a couple of times, so we're excited you're here. If you didn't get a book, buy it. It's a great graduate, a gift for a graduate of high school or college. So, Dr. Lawson, take it away.
Thank you. What a great crowd. Thank you for coming out. I know everyone's like, oh, we're out, it's great. There was some talk, I guess, about kicking this till next month. And at first I was like, yeah, sure, next month is great. And then within an hour, an email came in, actually, everyone wants to do it this month. So thanks for coming out. And this is, for those of you, I think a couple of you were at the SMU gig where Ben and I talked together about this book. And this talk is going to be 50% better because he's not here. So this is on video, right? So good, make sure I get a link so I can send that to him. I want to do this pretty quick. This is fun and games. I'm going to have to go down here a little bit because my clicker, the battery broke, so I'm going to have to hit the button. But let's talk about Socialism Sucks. Two economists drink their way through the unfree world. This is obviously a little bit of a departure for Ben and myself. I've written a bunch of boring journal articles, which no one reads, and Ben's written even more boring articles that no one reads. And he runs the Free Market Institute at Texas Tech University, guns up and all that nonsense. So we're good friends, we travel a lot, we see the world the same way, and we, like everyone in this room, is a little confused about things like Bernie Sanders, a U.S. senator, elected U.S. senator who openly calls himself a socialist. We have AOC, we have elected members of Congress who are calling themselves socialists. We've always had socialists in America, but we've never had socialist U.S. senators. So this is a little bit of a new thing. And it's a little bit concerning. My day job as an economist, my research on the economic freedom of the World Index, all the things I do tells me that socialism is a terrible idea. And I've got charts and data to back all that up, but no one reads the charts and the data, so we decided to write a book that actual human beings might read. But then we thought, oh hell, I don't know how to write for actual human beings, so we have to completely relearn how to write, and this is it. We also decided we want to have a lot of fun. We like to have fun anyway. We're both high-functioning alcoholics, and we wanted this. We wanted our personalities. I mean, if we're gonna have a fun games trade press book that's not an academic book, we're gonna actually have fun with it, and hopefully that comes out. It's not always that. Oh, I'll talk about that at the end. It's not always the most charitable view of ourselves because we're not always the best of human beings. But let's. I'm gonna walk down here so it's a little closer about that. So you've probably seen polls like this. This is, of course, the esteemed academic Michael Moore, and he says most polls show young adults prefer socialism over capitalism. I don't know what this fairness and selfishness nonsense is. There's a lot of confusion in that short tweet, but he's not wrong about the polls. The polls, in fact, show that large numbers on the order of 40, even 50%, depending on the poll, of young people have favorable views towards socialism. And this is obviously a concerning thing. So it's that kind of thing, and then the Bernie Sanders, the OC, that really motivated us to get into this, to do this book. So we decided to hit the road because we like to travel. We're both executive platinum flyers on American Airlines. And we just hit Sweden, Venezuela, Cuba, Korean Peninsula, China, Russia, Ukraine, the country of Georgia, and we ended up back in the USSA. A little play on the Beatles song. And I gave this talk at a university recently, and someone put their hand up and said, well, what does that mean? And they're like, the Beatles, my lord. I mean, so I really felt old, but hopefully everyone here knows what that roughly is. So let's go through this quickly. We're gonna have some time for Q&A here. So Sweden, let's start there. And each chapter has an adjective in front of socialism. So the Sweden chapter is not socialism, and we wanted to define our terms very clearly from the get-go. Sweden is a lot of things, but one thing it is not is socialism. Socialism means something. It's always meant something. It meant something to Karl Marx. It means something to my socialist professors at my undergraduate school, Ohio University, go Bobcats. And it means the collective ownership and control of the means of production. It means that at a large level, it means the state is going to own and control the means of production. The means of production being the factories, the land, the capital. The occupations will be decided by some central plan. And Sweden is not centrally planned. There are no Swedish bureaucrats in Stockholm who decide how many cars Volvo makes, what color the cars are, and what kind of engines they put in the cars, and whether they're two-wheel drive or four-wheel drive or whatever. This Volvo is a privately owned firm, publicly traded on the stock market somewhere, I'm sure. And they make their own decisions. Swedish farmers wake up in the morning and they decide what kind of crops they're going to produce. They sell those products on grocery stores that are privately owned, and Swedish citizens live for the most part in privately owned homes and apartments. This is a market economy fundamentally based on private property. It's not structurally that different than the United States. Now there is one big difference everybody in this room probably knows and appreciates, is that their taxes are about 50% higher than our taxes. So they're different in that regard, but that doesn't make them socialism. The fact that our average tax rate, the whole economy in the United States is about 40% now, 39.7%. And Sweden is about 49.7%. So it's not even, it's like 30% higher. So they have a bigger government, and with the bigger government they do a lot of dumb things, because that's what governments do, but it's not a socialist economy. Okay, so we wanted to establish that fact. In the Economic Freedom Index that I work on in my regular job, the thing that I do, the reason SMU gives me money is because I work on this Economic Freedom Index. Sweden is, and when we wrote this it was 27, I think they're now 33rd, but the point is, out of 160 countries that we score, Sweden is much closer to the United States and Hong Kong than it is to Venezuela, which is last in the index that we have. So it's a market economy. Yes, they have high taxes. They got a big welfare state. I think that's a bad thing. The Swedish economy would do better if they had a smaller government. I think our government we would do better if we had a smaller government too. But again, that's not making them a socialist country as such. So that's the first thing. And then let's go to actual socialism places. Starving socialism. That title was chosen intentionally. We went to the border of Colombia and Venezuela. The city on the Colombian side is called Cucuta. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere. You can fly there. It's a big city, actually, on the Colombian side. Maybe 800,000 people. It's a good-sized city. And many of you, if you've seen any news reports about Venezuela and the crisis in Venezuela, the bridges that cross across a small river between the two countries, every day, certainly when we were there, every day, without exaggeration, tens of thousands of Venezuelans are crossing these bridges on foot because it's closed to cars. So they cross on foot and they go shopping because there's nothing to buy in Venezuela. The average Venezuelan, this is officially recognized even by the Venezuelan government, has lost about 20 to 30 pounds. And they're not all on Jenny Craig. The country is quite literally not able to feed its population. And the best part about writing a book about drinking and traveling is I can drink while I give my talk. Ben and I were like, we should have figured that out a long time ago. So, so starving socialism, and it really was, I think, of all the things we did and wrote about in the book, this is the one that had the most emotional impact on both of us. So, what's weird, I've seen some of the world's worst poverty. I've been to India, the slums of Delhi. I've seen some of the worst poverty in Africa and Indonesia. I mean, stomach-turning poverty, I've seen it. This was not like that. And one difference was these were not poor people. Large numbers of the people, in fact, in the middle picture there, that's a father and his son. The father's got a backpack and 2 rolling suitcases. His son's got a bag in one hand and a roller in the other. They were quite obviously, from their dress and demeanor, wealthy Venezuelans. They were not poor people. We talked, they don't have a picture of them, but we talked to a couple, Ana and Paulo, Ana Maria and Paulo. And they had driven to Cucuta to go shopping. 3 days, one way, so it's a 6-day round trip. From the other side of Venezuela, they lived on the eastern side of Venezuela. They drove in a car to the western side to cross, to load up their car with rice, beans, sugar, deodorant, shampoo, aspirin. They were going on a 6-day Kroger run. And I'm like, God, that was like, wow. And Paulo worked in a hotel. He actually spoke a little English. These were not peasants. I'm like, wow, how bad would my life have to be, like living in Dallas, how bad would my life have to be for me to get in my car and go to Vancouver for groceries? And this is the equivalent of what these people did. And it was very, very emotional. It really got personal. I really felt deeply sorry for these people. I don't want to make it sound like I don't care about regular poor people, but these were not poor people. When middle class and upper middle class people are getting to this point, imagine what it's like for the real poor in Venezuela, which there's a lot of. There are some funny stories though. On the way in, we were kind of confused at first. We arrived on the way in to Colombia. They're carrying the bags that they're going to bring out the food with, but the bags were heavy on the way in, and of course they're filled with Venezuelan currency, which is quite heavy. And so Ben's holding. It's very famous. We're pretty good economists. I like to think we're pretty good. We're terrible photographers. It's backlit. I mean, we're terrible. But Ben's holding a stack of bills, probably about 6 inches to 8 inches high. That's $8 US dollars. And that was the highest. He's holding 100 Bolivar notes. That's the highest denomination available at the time. So if you wanted $100 US, it would be a stack of bills as high as a human being. When you go to change money on the street, we just changed money with some guy on the street. I mean, he just weighed, they weigh it. They don't really, it's absurd. So the hyperinflation that's hit Venezuela, it's something else. Now, this is really not a beer book, but it's Ben and Bob's book, so there's beer involved. And we found that beer became a very useful metaphor for these countries. And it's been very helpful on the media interviews we sometimes have had to do. So in Venezuela, they have a major national beer called Polar. They actually brew a little bit in the United States in Miami. You can buy it at Total Wine if you want to buy it. It's not good, but but they've actually had times where the factories have not been able to produce beer. And the reason for that is the socialist government, they're nationalizing not just the oil industry, they're nationalizing farms, they're nationalizing major production facilities. They've nationalized the financial and banking system in the country. And so they're in control of all foreign exchange. The government's in control of foreign exchange. And Polar needs to import barley because they don't grow barley in Venezuela. And the government didn't give Polar, on several occasions, they've not given Polar enough dollars because you might not be surprised to learn that barley farmers in America expect to be paid in dollars, not bolivars. So Polar doesn't get dollars, Polar doesn't get barley. If Polar doesn't get barley, they don't make beer. And so they've started to have shortages of beer. And I know one thing, if I was a socialist dictator, I would make sure they had beer, if nothing else. So we're going to come back to the alcohol theme a little bit because it kind of encapsulates the system. Let's move on to Cuba. We went to Cuba. This is the Hotel Trinton, a three-star hotel, recommended to us by a friend, a Mexican friend, lives in Mexico City, Jose Torra. And Jose said, I said, we don't want to go to the Hotel Nacional, the fancy diplomat hotel. We want to go to a regular Cuban, tourist hotel. He said, Trinton, go to that one. It's in the suburbs. And up in the far left, that's what a poster in the lobby of the hotel. It was built with Soviet money in 1979, gleaming white towers. Today, it's not so white. In fact, every one of the windows you can't see because I'm a terrible photographer again. But every one of those windows is busted out. Only the first 10 floors actually had windows that were working. The 3 of the 4 elevators were broken. It's going to get much worse, people. So the inside of the hotel bathroom, mold and a tile was out, holes in the thing. There's a stain on that glass that came out of a bag that said sanitized. At least that's what I think it says in Spanish, but it's it was hilarious. Ben came home drunk and sat on that toilet seat, but the one bolt on the seat is out, so he flipped off, and I'm still laughing about that. It's still funny to me. But fear not, this hotel was very kind to leave soap. It's left over from the previous guests, but it was soap. And so this hotel sucked. I've stayed in bad hotels. This is about as bad a hotel as I've ever stayed in. And the reason it's not a nice hotel is because it's a government-owned hotel. What happens to this hotel if they treat their customers badly? They don't change the soap or they have bad stained glasses. They will not go out of business. They'll be in business tomorrow, they'll be in business next month, 6 months from now, a year from now, 10 years from now, they will still be in business. If Marriott put out a product like that, Marriott would go out of business, and rightly so. There is better news in Cuba if you go, which I don't advise you to go, it's a terrible place. There are private homes now. So about 12 years ago, the Cuban government liberalized the rental housing market a little bit. Cubans aren't allowed to own homes, technically. They don't own their homes. They have a residency permit. So you have a house. It's yours, but the permit says you can live there. But they allowed, starting 12 years ago, they allowed these people who have their residency permits in a particular house or apartment, they allowed them to rent a room out or rent out the whole place to other people, particularly tourists. You can actually go on Airbnb and rent a apartment. It's called Casa Particulares in the Cuban system. You can rent one of these places, and we rented a couple of them. And they're quite nice. As good as any Airbnb. You get a nice coffee maker, air conditioning, lovely air conditioning. That was like $30, $40 a night. It's kind of funny, how'd you get on Airbnb though? Because there's no internet in Cuba to speak of, and they don't take credit cards in Cuba because of our embargo. But for every Cuban in Cuba, there's 5 Cubans living in Miami, and so one of their relatives or friends would put up a listing for them on Airbnb in America, and then you pay them, and then they call their friends and say, hey, Bob and Ben will be there on Tuesday, and meet them at this particular corner at a certain time. So you can actually still do it that way. You don't need to do it that way, because if you just walk down any street and you're clearly not a local Cuban, and Ben and I kind of stand out, in Cuba, and so, everybody's like, hey, you need a place to stay. This is the way to stay in Cuba. Do not stay at Hotel Trinitons. We stayed in 2 government hotels and regretted it both times. and the other times we stayed in these casas, they were much nicer. The restaurant scene's very much the same. They've liberalized private restaurants. So the only two really good working parts of private property and private enterprise in Cuba are private restaurants and private rental homes, like apartments or Airbnb type places. Everything else is state-owned. It's complete socialist enterprise. And let's talk about the beer. They had beer, thank God. But it was weirdly priced. So a beer in Cuba would be $1.50. And then a rum would be $1.75, which is strange to me. So we drank a lot of rum, because when they only charge up 25 cents or something for rum, I'm gonna have rum. And the rum's actually good, the beer isn't so good. But they only have two types of beer. And if you look at that store, and I could show you pictures of empty stores all over Cuba, all over Havana. We went all over different cities around the island. Plenty of stores where there's bare shelves. But there was one, we took the picture because it was actually a well-stocked little sort of tienda, little store, and this is in central Havana. But if you look closely at that photo, there's only about 15 or 20 items for sale. Now there's a lot of them. There's a lot of Coca-Cola. Ben called it Kami Cola. It's their local cola. I think it's called Coca-Cola. And there's water, and there's some candy bars, but there's one type of this, one type of that, one type of that. The entire store, I mean, a 7-Eleven, the smallest 7-Eleven is going to have 5,000 different items or something. I don't know how many items, how many SKUs, but this one has about 20 items. So the Cuban socialist system works in a sense. I think the chapter is called subsistence socialism. No one's starving in Cuba. They are providing enough calories for people to survive till the next day. But the absolute, utter lack of variety, even for us rich tourists, after just a week, like there's only 2 beers. It's Cristal and Bucanero, and then tomorrow there's the same 2 beers. And, I can't imagine what it'd be like to live there, year after year after year, and just the absolute, utter lack of variety. So, socialism promises equality. That's their selling point. That's the number one thing on their selling card is, hey, give us the power over the economy. We will deliver equality. And equality is a nice thing. I'm in favor of it. But what they actually deliver very often isn't, even when they deliver something like they do in Cuba, they don't deliver equality so much as they deliver sameness. The quality of life is the same. It's not just you're going to be equal to your neighbor. Your life's going to be the same as your neighbor. And I don't know about you, but that doesn't quite sound like such a nice thing, right? I mean, equality's kind of got a nice buzz to it, but sameness is a little bit of a different tinge to it. And I think that's the problem. And we really, really struggle to actually enjoy the island because even after a few days, there was no variety in life. Everything was pretty much the same. The menu items in the restaurants were the same. It's just the same. I got to talk about the cars. I'm a car guy. Ben's got an old Corvette. I got a '68 Volkswagen Beetle right now. And so when you first get there, it's like, oh, cool, I can ride in a '57 Plymouth or a '56 Chevy, and all this really neat. Until you realize that the Detroit motor blew up 30 years ago, and they got a Fiat engine in it now. There's no suspension. There's nothing. I mean, don't even ask about air conditioning. It's a disaster. So the cars are cool, but they're terrible. And that red car in the background, I ask everybody, how much are these cars? They do sell on a secondary private market. So this is another sort of a black-gray market. That car in America, that red car in the background, that's a barn find. That's a parts car in the classic car market. That's worth a couple $1,000s. A collector might buy it. Hey, if you fix it up, it might be worth $20,000. But that car is worth nothing in the condition that it's in. It's worth nothing in the American car market. In Cuba, that car, as poor as Cubans are, that car will sell for $15,000 to $20,000, which is absurd. Now it's going to get much worse. That white car in the foreground is a 1991 Renault or Peugeot, I can't remember. It's a 91 French car. Now the 1991 Renault was a piece of crap the day it was built. But imagine what a 30-year-old Renault is. I mean, that's a piece of junk. That car, if you could even find it in a used car lot, and I mean, even Dallas, the poorest parts of South Dallas probably don't have these cars on the lot. That's how bad that car is. That car is a $500 car at best in America, all right? I mean, that's a junker. That's a $30,000 car in Cuba. Why are these prices don't make any sense? Why are the prices so crazy? Well, you don't have to be an economist to know the Cuban government will not let people import cars. And if you can't import cars, you restrict supply. Even as poor as people are, prices get bid upwards. And that guy in the blue shirt who owns that piece of crap white French car, he's a rich man. Because if you own a car, you're a taxi. And that's the other way to really make money outside of government employment. And so, and the taxis are actually quite expensive. It takes $5 or $10 to get just a few blocks. It's actually like New York City pricing. It's pretty ridiculous. Like, how is this poor country? I can't get around. But so he uses his car as a business. And so the reason the price of those cars, even though that car should be almost worthless, the reason that car is so expensive is because there's very few cars, A, and B, the income that you can earn by operating as an illegal taxi basically capitalizes into the value of that car. You know, what happens the day after Cuba liberalizes their economy and allows car imports? That guy takes a massive capital loss, doesn't he? A $30,000 car will become worthless. And that's going to be one of the problems for Cuba, is if they ever do move towards a market system, a more liberal market system, people like him are going to lose their shirts. All right, let's, oh gosh, Korea. We did not go into North Korea because we have wives and children, and they were adamant about that. We went to the border, though. We did the border trick again. We went, but not the South Korean. You don't go to the South Korea, the DMZ, South Korea, North Korea border. You can't see anything. It's like 12 miles wide or something. Yeah, it's a tourist trap. So we went to the Chinese-North Korean border. The city on the China side is called Dandong. It's a major city in China. I think we get 6-7 million. It's like Dallas. Of course, in Chinese terms, that's a mid-sized city, but it's a large city in China on the Korean border. It's the major trading place, though, between China and North Korea. On the Korean side, across the river, the Yalu River, there's a major North Korean city of about 800,000 people. And we can get there. I mean, it's just a small river crossing. You can get out, and we took boats up and down the river. We were as close to North Korea as either one of us were comfortable getting. You've all seen this satellite photograph, and that's not a Photoshop. The Dandong is you see that bright spot up on the upper left of North Korea, that's Dandong. So the big, and it's not Shanghai, but it's a very impressive modern Chinese city with skyscrapers and signs and advertising and it's a beautiful scene at night. But if you look, when we got there, you look across the river, the two pictures on the left, there's absolutely nothing over there. We got there at night, and we were like, well, let's go down the river. North Korea is right over there. And like, oh shit, we're in the wrong place. I mean, sorry for the language, we're in the wrong place. You know, because there's nothing over there. There's like one little lantern or something. That big light actually is the moon. It's not a light. There's a full moon in it. And we woke up, the picture on the top left and the picture on the right, that's the same photograph. And when you look across the river, all that stuff in the foreground, that's China. And if you look in the background side across the river, there's actually a substantial settlement over there of literally hundreds of thousands of North Koreans, and it is pitch black at night. So that Photoshop is not some right-wing, that satellite photograph is not some right-wing Photoshop that someone did, one day. That's actually what it is. So in the chapter, we talk about the Korean, thing. It's one of the, we had East and West Germany, but, this is one of the great classic sort of natural experiments that God gave us about socialism and capitalism. And South Korea was, if anything, poorer than North Korea when the war began, and certainly when the war ended, since a large part of the war happened in the South side. And today, of course, South Korea is a major industrial power, and citizens there live comfortable, dignified lives, and we all know what it's like in North Korea. So we'll talk about that. We went on to China, same trip, but we spent quite a few days in both Shanghai and Beijing. This chapter is called Fake Socialism. It wasn't always fake. Under Mao, it was real socialism, and 20 to 30, 40 million people paid with their lives for that real socialism. So we talk about the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution and all that as part of the chapter. But if you go there today, it's fake. There's no socialism there. Because first thing, you see advertising everywhere, right? And the farms are now privatized, the businesses are private. They have some state-owned enterprises still, but most of economic activity, 80% of Chinese GDP is produced in the private sector. It's a market economy. Now it's still got a messed up economy in lots of ways. On the Economic Freedom Index, I think they're only about halfway. They're like somewhere halfway between Venezuela and Hong Kong. So it's not very economically free, not even nearly as economically free as, say, Sweden, but they've come a long way from Mao's days and the prosperity that is palpable. We were there. And so this is fake socialism. I love the picture on the bottom. That's actually only a 30-year-old photograph on the bottom. That's Shanghai, old Shanghai in the foreground. In the background is Pudong, but the big skyscrapers. So 30 years ago, Pudong was swamps and slums, and now that's a major financial center for Shanghai. So it's fake socialism. And so the chapter talks about how they made the transition from Maoist real socialism to this thing they have now, which is technically socialism. I mean, it's still a communist party running things, but the reality is they're faking it now. They're giving people the freedom to prosper, and it's worked reasonably well. Hungover socialism. Russia, and we went to Russia, both Moscow and Kiev, so we talk about the Soviet Union experience here. Another 20, 30 million people died as a result of this particular experience. This is where we get a little bit wonky. This is where we put our economist hats on. We did talk about what economists call price theory. One of the things that Soviet central planners were really bad at was pricing stuff. They're really bad at making stuff, because socialist economies are terrible at making things. They can't make toilet paper, they can't make butter, they can't make meat. They're just bad at making things. But then they compound their error by mispricing things. So they don't make enough stuff, but then they misprice it. So they wouldn't make a lot of butter, but then what little butter they did produce, they would send it to the Soviet stores, Moscow stores, and then they'd sell it for cheap. So what happens? You don't make a lot of something and you underprice it. It's like toilet paper 2 months ago, right? You all saw that. You're like, it's gone. There's no butter. So line forming, whenever there was a shipment from the butter factory, or for the meat arrived, or something good arrived from some random Soviet enterprise that actually made something and got it to a store, it was always underpriced, and people knew it was going to sell out immediately. So people will find lines. There are surveys from Soviet times that a Soviet housewife would spend 30% of her time waiting in lines. The lines were so endemic. Like if you were walking home from to your flat or something, and you saw a line, you would just get in the line, and then ask the guy, "Hey, what are you waiting for?" And hope like heck that the stuff's still there by the time you get to the front of the line. So the good news is, it's no longer, they don't have any central planners in Moscow. It's a terribly kleptocratic disaster of an economy. But they don't have central planners, which means at least they're getting prices right, which means there's no lines for stuff anymore, except for one. That's the line to get in to see Lenin's dead, lifeless body. Lenin's tomb, it's the only line we found. And I think actually that's appropriate. If you're gonna have a monument to Lenin, there should be a line for that, because that was the most memorable part of Soviet life, was waiting in lines. All right, my favorite country is Georgia. This is a little bit of a homer for me. I've been to Georgia more times now than I can count. I really couldn't, it's probably 16, 17, 20, I don't know. Upper teens. I was there when the Russian war happened in August of 2008. Which was a whole nother lecture. But we went to Georgia, and this title is not something socialism. It was socialism, it was a Soviet republic. But today we call this chapter New Capitalism. In 2003, so in 91 they broke off from the Soviet Union, like all the Soviet republics did. They fought some civil wars, had some inflation, bad times happened in Georgia. Several 100,000 Georgians came to America. Opened great Georgian restaurants. Thank you for coming. But what happened in 2003? They had a second revolution. It's called the Rose Revolution. And this guy named Mikhail Saakashvili got his law degree at Columbia, wore like Italian tailored suits. These guys put together very good English, very charismatic guy. I know Misha a little bit. He's a nice guy. Very, as politicians go anyway. And he takes over from the old Soviet guys that were running things for the first 10 years, and he's like, I gotta do something. He wanted to become more Western, more oriented towards Europe, towards the United States, and so he hires this guy named Kaha Bendikidze. There's no exam on these names later, but he hired a guy named Kaha. Kaha was a chemical engineer and made a lot of money in Russian privatizations. He's a 400-pound beast of a human being. He taught me cuss words that I still am grateful for learning. This guy was a take no prisoners kind of guy, and he was a crazy libertarian. And Misha says, Kaha, you're in charge of the Georgian economy. Now, the Georgian economy is not a large economy. Our city is bigger than their country, but about 4 million people live in Georgia. But Kaha decides to show up at government offices, ask, hey, how many people work here? And they'd say, well, 100. And so how many are here right now? 10. I need to fire 90 of them. I'm not exaggerating. Kaha Bendikidze fired 80% of the executive branch of the Georgian government in about a 6-month period. They fired 35,000, again, Georgia's not a large country. They fired 35,000 police officers in a single day. And crime went down. Because they were the criminals. The cops were criminals. They were robbing people at gunpoint, literally at gunpoint, on the streets of Georgia. And Kaha just fired them all. And Misha let him get away with it. They took their tax rate down. Their total tax rate's 20%, total. That includes payroll, Social Security, income taxes, total. They have no tariffs on imported goods. 0 tariffs, complete free trade. Adam Smith loves these guys. They went to capitalism as hard. In the Economic Freedom Index that I do, in the new report, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but in the new report, they're going to be 8th in the world. It's a Soviet Republic 30 years ago, and Georgia has now got a higher score than the United Kingdom. All right? So they went, and so alcohol stories, though. Alcohol stories. Oh, North Korean beer, the most toxic thing I've ever seen, ever tasted. Oh my God, I still feel ill. Ask me that later. Georgia's wine country. Historians do debate this, but archaeological evidence for winemaking in Georgia goes back to 8,000 BC. They believe that this is the first place on earth human beings made wine. And they have a traditional winemaking style and tradition that continues to this day. And they have a particular style called a quevri. And it's a big clay pot, they throw everything in it, and then they bury the pot, they wait a little bit, dig up the pot. No stainless steel, none of this nonsense you see at wineries today. And the reds are really good, but sometimes the whites come out almost orange. It's like an orange color, it's like an amber. It's unlike any white wine you've ever seen. So if you're a wine snob, they make great Georgian wine, by the way, in the traditional way, the sort of French style, but they also make their Georgian style wine. And if you're a wine snob, you really need to put it on your radar. But the wine production there is so small, you can't go to the store and get it. You've got to go to Georgia if you want the great Georgian wine. They just don't have enough of an export supply yet. So now the Soviet Central Planners knew that Georgians were into wine. Again, they got 10,000 years of winemaking history. Soviet Central Planners are socialists, but they're not idiots. So they assigned Georgia in Soviet times the task of making all the wine for the whole system. And what did they do though? 10,000 hectares of Cabernet, Merlot, Chardonnay, crap from France, and they made out bazillions of gallons of just dreadful, worst wine you've ever tasted. And shipped it throughout the Soviet Union, and let's face it, if you were in Siberia and you got a Georgian wine, I don't care how bad it is, you're gonna drink it. But the Georgians hated it, because they know what real wine is supposed to taste like. And so since the new reforms have come in, this is probably the most vibrant part of their economy. It's one of their biggest exports. You can buy exported wines from Georgia in some very nice wine shops, particularly on the coasts. But the wine thing became a metaphor then too. You know, it's just beers. You can't get it in Venezuela. You only get 2 types in Cuba. North Korean beer is toxic, but what it does, what capitalism has done for the alcohol market in Georgia, and it's bringing back this traditional style, which is also quite neat. I'm giving the finger. Stalin was Georgian, of course, and I'm giving the finger to his statue at his home birthplace in Georgia. I couldn't help it. I'm not a nice person. Last thing, we ended up in Chicago, which is not socialist yet. But they do hold the largest socialist conference in America in Chicago every year in July. I assume they won't have it this year. Maybe they will, I don't Ben and I decided, we hopped on the internet and said, Socialism Conference in Chicago in 3 weeks. We're there. We paid our registration fee. They do charge, which is weird, but they charge for it. And when you get there, it's a little strange. There's 2,000 mostly young socialists there. They call each other comrade. I swear to God, that's true. It's strange. When the first person really calls you comrade in an unironic way, it's like, that's the weirdest feeling. I got good news for you. They all love Bernie, they all love AOC, but they're probably a little harder core than even they are. Because these are people that go to a socialism conference. These are the real deals. Here's the good news. They are not Stalinists, Maoists. They don't have t-shirts of Pol Pot. They have read enough history and they know that real hard state socialism, like was practiced in China, in the Soviet Union, in Cambodia, and Vietnam, was absolutely devastatingly awful for human beings. And they are aware of this. So they're not giving lectures at this conference about we need to get Stalin back, right? They are softening their message. And that's good news. If they were Stalinists, I would have just been freaked out. They were not. Okay, so that's good news. About half the crowd were just sort of lefty kids who have social justice causes. I hate that kind of term, social justice warriors and all that. But they had causes, and I'm not really a conservative. I'm more of a libertarian in that job. So I actually had a lot of agreement with a lot of their causes. I think there are too many racist cops in America, and a lot of these people did too. And I'm like, yeah, we should do something about the racist cop problem. That's a problem. And then they're like, we should do something. Immigrants are getting treated poorly. And I'm like, I'm a libertarian. I'm like, yeah, I think they are too. We should maybe. So about half of their issues, I'm like, I'm with you, brother, sister. I'm with you. But half of them are not. They want to, do crazy things. I'm like, no, that's nuts. But the good news is Ben and I both found some common ground with these people. They see injustices. But even when they saw an injustice that I thought also was an injustice, they had no clue how to fix it. They somehow think turning over power to Washington or Austin is going to fix racist cops. The cops in the Soviet Union, this is mind-boggling. So what they have is a sort of a means and ends problem. Their ends, very often I think, are ends that most people in this room would even agree with. We don't disagree so much on the ends. They just don't understand the means to achieve those ends. They think socialism is going to be a means to achieve those ends, and they're wrong about that. But that, again, I came away mostly optimistic. At least they weren't Stalin. I was worried we were going to run into some really hardcore, crazy people. There was another group there, though, that was more sophisticated, and they were advocating something called worker socialism. Sometimes they would call it democratic socialism, but they don't mean democratic socialism in a big way. They mean it like worker-run enterprises, co-ops. They want to see a world where we don't have private businesses, we have employee-run businesses, like co-ops. By the way, there's nothing illegal about a co-op in America. You can have a co-op right now, start a business, make it a co-op, perfectly legal. The capitalist system lets you create whatever kind of business you want, and if you want to create a worker-run business, you can do that. And we have them, and some of them are quite successful in America. But, as Ben likes to say, no worker-run co-op is going to make an iPhone. It's never going to happen. Our standard of living, our modern standard of living, hinges on extraordinarily complex business and financial arrangements that cannot be done if we have to have an election every 3 days with the workers about whether we're going to do this or do that. You can run a grocery store that way, the 4th Street Co-op in Manhattan. You can run breweries. Half the breweries in Austin, I think, are worker co-ops, right? That's fine. You can run a brewery. We can all vote on what beer we're going to make next month. Great, no problem. Do you want to run? But you can't have votes on what kind of, how to make an iPhone. So their system of worker-run sort of democracy from below, as they call it, it wouldn't be tyranny. It wouldn't create, the KGB, right? So it wouldn't be as bad as Soviet Russia or Mao's China, but it would be a poor place. It would be a very poor place. The economics of that kind of system would result in some pretty bad productivity. So, but again, at least they weren't Maoists, so we give them some credit. Just to finish up, the beer we were drinking there was called Revolution Brewery beer, the largest craft brewery in Chicago, and therefore the largest craft brewery in all of Illinois, is Revolution Brewery. Their bar pull taps are raised fists with red stars on them. Although it's the Illinois Red Star. It's not the Commie Red Star, but it's still a Red Star. And I think that's Anti-Hero IPA, is there in that green one there. Here's the irony though, is that, and we were drinking this beer like crazy. The kids loved it. Revolution Brewery, comrade, this is our stuff. But here's the reality of it. Revolution Brewery is a for-profit, privately owned firm, and they make about 30 craft beers, which is a better quality and variety of beer than all the socialist countries in the world combined. So it was a little ironic, but anyway, if you go to Chicago, drink some Revolution IPA, it's good stuff. Book did pretty well, thanks to Mark Levin. Mark Levin sold a lot of books, and he was very good to us in a lot of ways. We hit top 10 on Amazon overall twice because of Mark Levin. Thank you. But we also hit #1 in Communism and Socialism, and we were there for a long time. Several weeks we were the #1 book in Communism and Socialism, because some books are more equal than others. But then we were the #1 book in beer for a long time too. I felt bad about that, because there are guys that really care about their beer, and this poor SOB writes this book about beer. And these two drunk economists, and the only thing about it, we got beer on the cover. It's not a beer book though, So we were #1 in the beer category. I always felt bad for the guys #2. Like, he actually wrote a real beer book, and Amazon's algorithm screwed him. Anyway, I just want to conclude, and we'll take some questions. Whatever time is allowed. This is not a book necessarily for everybody. You might have kind of pick this up. I think we say the F word on the second line of the book. I've never used the F word. I use it every day in my day life, but I've never written it down in an article before this book. I think there's about a dozen of them. We had like 40 or 50 in the first volume, and my wife's like, got to cut out at least 2/3 of the F word. All right. It's sometimes bawdy. There's some, I hate to say it, I'm going to own it. There's some low-grade misogyny, because Ben and I are not woke, and we're male, and we drink too much, and have been known to occasionally look at pretty women. And some people think that detracts. I think it adds. It's a balancing act. I wouldn't buy this book for a 10-year-old. I'd probably buy it for a mature 13-year-old. So I do want to. And Robert Waples, who's an economist at Wake Forest, he says at one time wonders if we need clinical help, and that's absolutely true. Another reviewer on Amazon, I don't know him, but Paul Fox, whoever he is, says he wouldn't want to drink with these guys. It's a bit earthy, and again, like I said at the beginning, if we were going to write a book, if we were going to get outside of our little academic world, if we're going to write a book for the real world, it's just going to be it's going to be our book. And Ben and I like to watch sports, drink beer, and look at pretty women, and tell bad jokes, and it's not necessarily for everybody. I mean, there are times where I'm cringing at my own behavior. I'm like, I did that, and I wrote that in a book, and now people are reading it. But that's the way it is. Okay. So anyway, with that, I'll finish and take Q&A for as long as we allow it.
Talk about the artwork for the cover when you were meeting with the publisher.
Oh yeah. So it's not a beer book, and the first cover. So Regnery is our publisher, and they sent us cover art, and it's got beer on it, frothy mugs. They sent us one with like a St. Pauli, like a German girl with big boobs, and sorry. And we're like, we didn't go to Germany, and that looks good. And socialism sucks. So that's why we came up with the sort of broken glass, and one of them was kind of empty, and so we wanted to make it a little bit more, like awful. But then the original title was Two Economists Travel Through the Unfree World. It's like, it's not a beer book. And the publisher says, this is a beer book. I'm like, oh, okay. So we changed the name to Drink Their Way Through the World. And then, but again, the metaphor, running out in Venezuela, 2 kinds of cube. That, when you're doing a 40-second bit on a talk radio tale, that became just a God's gift for us to be able to give our message out in a very short way. So using alcohol as a metaphor for these systems was completely unintentional, though. The book was written, done, and then only afterwards did we realize that was a really good way to message the thing. So yeah, I'm gonna go here and I'll come over to you.
I'm a teacher just like you are, and I know that these kids, whenever they get to the college level, are getting so much left stuff. I would call it crap. I would probably call it worse than that. But I'm hoping that you're taking this message every time you teach a class, however or were you interjected into the syllabus, that they come out of it going, maybe it's not such a good idea?
Yeah, I do. I think it's not as bad out there as we think it is, but it's very, very bad in some places, and those are the places that make the news. But you know, I teach MBAs at SMU, so I mean, I'm not getting a lot of socialist Bernie bros in Miami. Like, there aren't a lot of AOC lovers who give SMU $130,000 for an MBA program. And so, in my personal, yeah, in my personal life, I don't encounter it, and Ben does. Ben's at Tech. I mean, Tech's also not. It's not like he's teaching at some liberal arts college in Maine or anything, you know. But he thinks it's overblown too. I will say this. I actually think the problem is not so much our kids, like conservative and libertarian students, who have to encounter left-wing professors, and there are a lot of left-wing professors. I mean, it is overwhelming. It's shockingly bad. But if you're a libertarian or conservative kid at a college campus today, you will come out a lean, mean arguing machine. I think the disservice is the left-wing kids. You get a left-wing kid who rolls into Bryn Mawr, and not once for 4 years will they have their ideas challenged by a professor. And they come out just speaking slogans. And I think that's bad for them. We should have a better college environment. But I actually, you know, I don't think we lose too many conservative libertarian students to the left-wing professors. We can't get them to read the syllabus. I'm not really worried about them being indoctrinated too much. But I think the other side really gets, because you run into them and you're like, they have nothing there. They haven't read Marx. They haven't read, like, if you're going to be a socialist and you don't know what surplus value means, as I know I'm getting professorial, but then how can you don't know what you're talking about. Our kids, because they have to defend themselves with their colleagues, and they read Friedman and Hayek and Adam Smith and stuff, and they know how to make the arguments. I'm going to go here and I'll come back. Yes, sir.
I was kind of hoping to hear what your takeaway was. If we read the whole book, where are we at? Where are we standing?
Yeah.
Do you mind? I mean,
yeah, I don't know. I don't know. We're never going to win. We're never going to lose, I don't think. We just got to keep fighting. I mean, I think Ben and I, or Levin asked us on the show whether we were optimistic, and we both said optimistic. I think this is a fad. I do think that it's not coincidence that more or less 10 years after the financial crisis, we have Bernie and AOC ascending the way she's still ascending. I think that a lot of this is a reaction to some of the nonsense of the financial crisis. Now, we lost that battle, folks. We screwed up. I don't know what we did wrong, but the financial crisis was not a failure of capitalism, it was a failure of socialism. It was a failure of a government-run financial system and a government-run and completely, housing system. But when the financial crisis hit, the narrative almost immediately was capitalism failed, capitalism failed, capitalism failed. And we lost that rhetorical battle, and those kids who were in junior high, freshman years in high school, that's the message they took. This crisis, I still think it's on the fence. I don't think, ideologically speaking, this particular crisis it's clear at all which ideology sort of wins the rhetoric on this virus crisis. But that one, so the good news is they'll age out of it. I mean, assuming we don't have another bad financial crisis of that type.
This was the second question. For me, it's empirical, but I seem to find that 25 and under are very unsettled because there are no trustworthy sources anymore. It's just, I at least grew up believing Walter Cronkite said the truth when he spoke. I'm finding that there's a group of people, well, again, I mean, we have books today that might question that, but it seems to be very unsettling today for what we call the next generation. They just don't have a source, a foundation. And does that impact socialism as kind of a de facto foundation
Yeah, but I think it's actually working in both ways. I think what's happening is the bell curve is flattening, and so we're getting bigger tails. We're getting a bigger socialism tail. We're getting a bigger libertarian tail. And it's because we don't have this sort of push to the middle that we had when our news and information was curated by 3 networks, and those 3 networks basically were the same messaging. Every kind of bit got crushed, and so you were really fringe. Now everything's kind of out there. And there's some good parts of that, because if you were a libertarian back in the old days, like I was, it's like, oh, this is terrible. You never hear a libertarian on TV. Now you can, but it's also working for fringe ideas and lots of conspiracy theories. I mean, flat earthers and things. There's all kinds of crazy things that are happening that never had a place because in the old days, because the media the way it was. Now you can find a Facebook group for every niche weird idea. And you can feel like you got a friend. So I think it's flattening out the ideological spectrum, and that means there might be some truth that we're discovering, but also there's definitely a lot of falsehoods that we're going to discover. Let me go to this.
Well, first of all, I have to admit that when you first went on stage, I was a little nervous because you carried a glass of water with you.
I know. Well, I didn't touch
And
it
so
though.
you confused me there. I think a lot of these young college kids, and my granddaughter graduated today from University of Maryland, and she got her free Dunkin' Donuts, wearing her reward board. Anyway, I find that a lot of these young people think socialism is socializing. They just don't get it.
Yeah.
They think it means that they're going to socialize. And honest to God, I don't believe they understand fully like you say. And I feel
Right.
it's
So
a
this-
real tragic. And also I wanted to know, what was the great allure? I had friends who were going to Cuba. Most of my family is
Oh, it's
from
miserable.
Cuba. And, they said in Cuba they had a Obama. His name was Castro. And they don't understand why so many people look at Cuba as a destination. What the heck?
Yeah. So.
I don't know if I'm asking any questions.
No, I actually did. This is again what I was saying a minute ago, though. These young socialists are so poorly schooled in not just capitalism or how the real world works, but they're poorly schooled on socialism. Michael Harrington was a great socialist. I'm sure he's long dead, but he one of the old socialists, academic socialists. I read several of his books. He had a line once, he says, the only really problem with my system is there's too damn many meetings. But the point is, he understood how the system actually worked. No one who was actually a socialist, who studied either the theory of it or the practice of it, thinks it's socializing. It's hard. We're gonna nationalize the means of production. It was brutal, and maybe they think there were good reasons for it, but there was nothing happy-go-lucky about it. And socialists, and the old socialists, knew it. These new ones, and it's because they don't know what socialism is. They just think it's all good, free stuff or whatever. It's happy. We're gonna circle the chairs and talk about our feelings or something. Like, well, that's not gonna make corn. It's not gonna make cars. It's not gonna make things work. So, and the other thing is, I don't understand the allure of Cuba. Cuba's terrible. It was miserable. If you ever go to Cuba, my advice is to bring salt. You have no idea how bad food tastes without salt. And so you have it without salt. It's because the Cuban government, actually this is a scandal, because the Cuban government, people know that they don't have any salt, because the Cuban government doesn't make it, they don't have money to import it. And so it's very, very hard to get. And, but the Cuban government has like propaganda ads that they've got, salt and pepper, that's bourgeois. You don't really need that. And it's true, you don't need it. I mean, you won't starve without salt. But Lord Almighty, after a week of no salt in your diet, they do smuggle in Tabasco. There's a good smuggling operation with the U.S. so you can get Tabasco. So get that instead. I'm gonna go to the fellow in the back, and I'm gonna do a little bit of Q. There, and there. Okay. All right. Let's go back to the. Yep.
Here in North Korea, is the yellow still a division between the China-Coms and North Korea? And if you were out in the yellow, could you identify today the bridges that Girly Man Truman refused to blow across the Alamo, allowing the cyclones to come across and decimate the first Marine division.
Yeah.
Frozen choke.
Yeah, so the bridge eventually got bombed. And so, so half of the bridge is there. The Chinese, so you can go out about halfway, and they've repaired the decking and stuff, so you can actually walk out on it. But the Korean half of the bridge is never been repaired. Because late in the war, the U.S. did bomb it, finally. Too late, but they did. And then there's a modern railroad bridge that's right next to it. So you can still go there and see it. And Chinese people are just as curious about North Korea as we are. And so Chinese tourists by the thousands go to Dandong, and they do the same thing we were doing. Oh look, there's North Koreans over there. You know, they're the same thing. But the bridge is actually, half of it's still there. It's like a monument now. Yeah. So, yeah, all right, I'm gonna go to the lady in the white, and then I'm gonna come back over here.
Well, I'm kind of confused in what your definition or difference between socialism and communism is. Because when we look at our social media today, when you have YouTube and Twitter and Facebook deleting posts they don't feel is correct, where does that stand? Does that become more a communist dictatorship of what you can and can't hear? Or, I mean,
Yeah, so.
what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, so this is actually, there's two ways to answer this. I mean, I don't want to be a professor right now, that's why I'm trying to hesitate.
Sorry, we want you to.
Communism, in Karl Marx's view, was this utopic thing that evolved out of socialism. So the Communist Party of the Soviet Union was not implementing communism, they were implementing socialism, which was the stage of history that Marx identified that preceded communism. We never got to the communism part because that'll never happen. But so one of the problems is the name Communist Party. Now what that means is a totalitarian state, and it had a different meaning in Marxist theory of things. So the words get used, but the fact of the matter is Russia and Mao's China, Cambodia, Vietnam, these places were socialist enterprises, not communist enterprises in the sense that Marx used that term, even though they were run by communist parties, not only named communist parties. On the Facebook, I get annoyed when they do this too. I mean, but look, I'm a libertarian. It's private property. They do what they want. You don't like it, make your own Facebook. I don't care. So I'm going to go to this young man here, and then this young lady.
How does your message play among your colleagues there at the top business?
Ben and I both, he runs a center, I run a center. We have a certain amount of, status at our respective places, so we weren't too worried. But I will tell you flat out, neither one of us were broadcasting widely on campus that we were on Mark Levin's show last night, and we're number 8 on Amazon. And it was weird though for different reasons. I will say that in my case, it was the socials. I mean, SMU is not Bryn Mawr, but there's a fair amount of left-wing professors there, and I didn't really want to put a target on my back over this. So it was the socialism side. His problem was the reverse, because he's in West Texas. His problem was the beer. Lubbock was dry until 20 years ago, so his worry was that he was going to get blowback from his dean or his provost or something because of the alcohol stuff. And I was worried about the socialist stuff, because SMU doesn't have any problem with alcohol, but they do have, So we were both a little bit reluctant to wave the book around on campus, but for really different reasons. But I will say that I've had no blowback. My dean and my media person loves it. I mean, I'm going to get a media award for this, I know. And I ended up doing a program at SMU, and where we did this talk with Ben, and it was well received, and I got no issues from it. I was worried President Turner was going to be mad. I'm an employee. I work there. I don't want to piss off the boss, but no problems. I'm going to go. Yes.
I just have 2 quick questions on your presentation. So, but China, you still cannot own private property, correct?
No, you can't. It's in the Chinese Constitution. Private property is allowed. You can, absolutely, yeah,
I was surprised.
yeah.
And then, I don't know my history on this, so how did Georgia go from Russia dominating them to being a free enterprise?
Well, it's still not clear that Russia,
In their minds.
1/3 of the country is occupied by Russian soldiers right now, so it's still not, the jury's far from out on this. You know, but they want to move. So one of the things that's happened in Georgian politics is how, I mean, they have the Russia is this beast, literally their northern border. They want to move western in an orientation. Some people want to join NATO. If they join NATO, Russia will invade Georgia, and Georgia's army will not stop them. So there's a big tug of war politically inside of Georgia. No one loves, they all hate Russians. Oh my God, they hate Russians. I mean, the Tsar, it wasn't just the commies. I mean, the Tsar took over Georgia in like 1814 or something. I mean, they hate Russians. So no one likes them, but the only question is tactically, how antagonistic do we want to be? Because when Saakashvili was very antagonistic towards Russia, Russia invaded. And I was there. I mean, it was kind of terrifying, actually. But, so there's some practical Georgians saying, why are we poking the bear? You know, don't leave them up there. But it's very, very dicey, very dicey. The geopolitical problem is Georgia's problem. Their economic system is almost as good as I would design myself. I mean, like, oh, this is great. Look at their labor code. I think that, oh my gosh, this is amazing. The problem is, from an international investor's point of view, the geopolitical risk is huge. The economic risk is low. Taxes and stuff, no problem. Regulations are no problem. But, you know, tomorrow Putin could invade, and the Georgian army cannot stop them. That's abundantly clear. So, yes, sir.
How do you measure the barometer for how capitalistic a country is?
So that's my day job. I produce something called the Economic Freedom of the World. Oh, thank you. Bless your heart. As they say here in the South. My day job is to work on this thing called the Economic Freedom of the World Index. It's an index of economic freedom, an index of how capitalist you are. And in our case, it's an extraordinarily data-driven exercise. We collect data on tax rates, tariff rates, and we just score countries. It's a big spreadsheet, and chips sort of fall out where they fall out. You know, Hong Kong comes out #1, always has, and will be next year again. I'm not supposed to talk about next year's results, but it will be #1 next year. Venezuela's last. We don't rank North Korea or Cuba because they don't have enough data. So it's, you know, it's called Economic Freedom of the World. That's how we do it, and that's my day job, actually. That's why I got the job at SMU. No one gives out jobs at the SMU for writing books about drinking your way through the unfree world. But but that's where my academic work is, my journal articles.
Follow up. So what do you think the best beer in the world is?
We like all of God's children. It's like asking a parent which of their children they like the most. I like them all. You know, by the way, we like wine and liquor as much too. People are like, do you guys drink liquor? Like, yes, we do. You know, weirdly, I am not a craft beer guy. I drink Miller Lite. And I make it up on volume though. So, I mean, with one of these, I mean, I'm pretty sure someone in this room loves their craft beer, and that's fine. But, you know, on an NFL Sunday, when games start at noon and they go till 9 or 10 o'clock at night, I'm not drinking hoppy IPAs. I'm gonna drink Miller Lite, because this is a marathon, right? So, you know, Ben is the same way. It's like, I just drink so much, I can't drink IPAs all day. I'll just go horizontal, like, you know. I actually drink bad domestic American beer. I know people are judgy on that. But he's a big wine snob. He's got a couple thousand bottles in a cellar in Lubbock. And he knows his wine for real. He's great to go to like a steakhouse, because he can find mispriced wines on a wine list better than I've ever seen.
So you're optimistic about Hong Kong?
No, I'm not.
Did you say they'll be #1?
They are. I mean, they're going to be #1, but I'm not optimistic long run. China's going to ruin it. I mean, I don't think we're not going to go back to Mao. I mean, Hong Kong for a long time was the shining capitalist star, I mean, they have a top tax rate of 15%. 1.5, not 5.0, 1.5, 15%. They have no tariffs. They just put their first minimum wage in a couple years ago. It's like $2 an hour. It's a ceremonial minimum wage. The only reason they put a minimum wage in is because they could say they had one. No one actually makes that little in Hong Kong. It is as free market as any place in human history. And it's been that for 50 years, and it's just glorious what's happened there. China's gonna cut off the knees. They won't die. It'll turn into just another rich place that's run by cronies, and I'm very sad about it. I'm very, very sad about it. One of the things about this virus crisis, you may know, although you may not know, because the media now will only talk about one story, and that's the virus, and that's a big story. But there's been a massive crackdown by the Chinese authorities in Hong Kong. Hundreds and hundreds of activists have been arrested. Just yesterday or today, they physically ousted the democracy elected leader of the democracy side, and had a revote so that person couldn't get it. They had security guards inside of Congress. There was a fist fight. And no one's even unless you really go actually digging, you will not see this in the news because the virus has consumed the media. Again, it's a big story. I don't blame the media for that, but China is using this virus as cover. Actually, a lot of governments are using this virus as cover to do some really evil things, knowing that the media won't call them on it like they normally would. That's just unfortunate. One of us or what? I'm not in charge.